Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to tackle a really important topic, borderline personality disorder, or BPD. We're using a fantastic practical workbook as our guide to help us break down what BPD is, where it comes from, and most importantly, the real, tangible path toward managing it. So, let's dive right in. Right off the bat, I want to start with this quote from our source material because it just sets the perfect tone. This whole conversation is not about stigma. It's about understanding and it's about empowerment. The core message here is one of genuine hope. So here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to start by exploring what it actually feels like to have BPD. Then we'll dig into its origins, we'll look at the patterns that can keep a person stuck, and we'll finish up on that hopeful path forward. All right, so first things first, let's try to get a handle on what the experience of BPD is really like. To do that, we need to go beyond just clinical terms and look at a real-world example to build some genuine understanding. So our source introduces us to a woman they call Betty. She's in her late 20s, and her story is a really powerful way to understand how the symptoms of BPD can actually show up in someone's day-to-day life, especially in their relationships. Wow. This quote really captures that emotional intensity, doesn't it? For Betty, a delayed text message isn't just a minor annoyance. It feels like absolute, total abandonment. And that feeling triggers this huge reaction, ending the friendship completely as a way to protect herself from that pain of rejection. This intense reaction to what feels like abandonment is just a central theme. Okay, so let's ground this in the official definition from the DSM-5, which our source workbook uses. The key phrase here is pervasive pattern of instability. This isn't about having a bad day or a bad week. It's a consistent, long-term pattern that affects how a person sees themselves, how they relate to other people, and how they manage their emotions. And these are the 9 core symptoms that are used for a diagnosis. A person needs to meet at least 5 of these criteria. You can totally see Betty's story reflected right here. That fear of abandonment, the unstable relationships that swing from amazing to terrible, the intense emotional reactions, it's all there. So that's the what of BPD. But what about the why? I mean, a diagnosis like this can feel like it comes out of nowhere, but the source material makes it super clear that BPD is the outcome of complex and actually very understandable factors. The workbook explains that BPD usually develops from this interplay of different factors. Think of it as a 50-50 split. Research suggests there's a pretty big genetic component, meaning you could inherit a predisposition for it. But that's only half the story. The other half is all about our environment, things like childhood trauma, neglect, or just growing up in a really chaotic home. And a really powerful way to understand how those environmental factors take root is through this idea called attachment style. Basically, the way we learn to connect with our parents or caregivers when we were tiny creates an emotional blueprint for how we approach all of our future relationships. You can kind of split these styles into 2 big buckets, secure and insecure. Someone with a secure attachment learned early on that they were safe, that they were valued. But for a lot of people with BPD, their early life led to an insecure attachment style. This is defined by a deep fear of being abandoned and a real difficulty in trusting other people. The source introduces another person, Tony, who was always testing his partner, never feeling truly secure, because he never had that safe foundation in his childhood. This brings us to a really empowering part of this whole thing, understanding how these patterns keep going. See, the workbook frames BPD not as some fixed, permanent state, but as a series of negative cycles that, once you see them clearly, you can absolutely learn to interrupt. Let's use Tony's story to map this out. His insecure attachment created this deep, core belief, I'm not worthy of love. So what did that lead to? A behavior, constantly testing his girlfriend to see if she'd finally leave him. And that pattern, of course, eventually pushed her away, which in his mind just proved that his original belief was right all along. It's this tragic, self-fulfilling prophecy. So what kicks off this feedback loop in the first place? What flips that switch? Well, the source calls these activators triggers. They're the specific events, feelings, or thoughts that set the whole painful cycle in motion.
And the workbook organizes these triggers into 8 main categories. Just recognizing them is the first crucial step toward taking their power away. A trigger could be something internal, like feeling really anxious, or it could be external, like a stressful party. By identifying your specific triggers, you can start to choose a different way to respond. Okay, so this brings us to our final and I think most important section. For a long, long time, BPD was seen as this lifelong, untreatable condition. But the research, which our source highlights, tells a very, very different story today. The workbook points to this landmark study that followed people with BPD over a long period of time. And what it found just completely turns that old life sentence narrative on its head. 10 years later, this is the percentage of people who no longer met the criteria for the disorder: 88%. Just let that sink in for a second. This data shows us that real, lasting recovery isn't just a possibility. It's actually the most likely outcome.
And recovery here means more than just the symptoms going away. The source is really clear on this. It means remission plus having good social and professional functioning. It's about having stable relationships, holding down a job. It's about building a life that you actually want to live.
And the path to that recovery? It isn't magic. It comes from doing exactly the kind of work this workbook lays out. Understanding the roots of your patterns, identifying your cycles and your triggers, and then just systematically learning and practicing new, healthier skills to deal with life's challenges.
And this question really gets to the heart of it all. BPD isn't who you are. It's a set of survival strategies that you learned in the past that just aren't serving you anymore. And by understanding them, you gain the power to unlearn them. The past doesn't have to define your future. The power to choose a new pattern to build a new future, that is absolutely in your hands.